An Angel at My Table was the first film I could say I production designed. You know, there had been one or two short films, and you know, I've been on the verge of production designing before that. But for films, that was the first job that I had to do, and what a great introduction it was. You know, with Jane Campion sort of really hitting a stride as a director, and you know, Hibiscus Films and Bridget Eichen, you know, was sort of like the producer. So you know, it was a really great bunch of people came together for it. The rich sort of resource material, the books had all this sort of detail in it, and you know, being able to read through all the books, and then being able to go down to Oamaru and actually visit the house that was on the south side of the hill where she grew up, and you know, to see the railway line down the bottom of the hill where Father used to throw the coal out of the train as he went past, so the kids could gather it up for the stove, and you know, all that sort of stuff was fantastic. And of course, you know, it was an Auckland-based gig, so we did a lot of the work. You know, we built Spain in Auckland here, and we built London in Auckland here. So you know, it was a lot. Again, it was a sort of set building, which I very much like, because it's sort of like hardcore sort of design, and also the period thing with all its you know, period references and things like that. It was great. He was very keen on doing as factual an account as possible. And of course, he couldn't resist going into their fantasy land and visualising their fantasy land. So, you know, it was, you know, that was one of the most powerful sort of aspects of it, really, because not very many directors would go there, and you know, from that era, mid-90s, early to mid-90s. So, you know, it was yeah, it was just good to be able to talk to the people who are actually there with the girls at their school, to describe the way that they went to school and what they did at school, to describe the houses at the time. Peter, I'm very pleased to say that Peter was very much into set building back then, you know, and so we were able to build these great sort of big and very detailed sets for, you know, but in the first instance as a duplicate of the Hume's house, which actually still exists down in Ilam. I think it's in a park down at Ilam somewhere. So we went in there, but of course we couldn't film there, so we ended up reproducing all the interior of that on the stage, and you know, and various other sets. And then making Borovnia was a bit of a sort of a fantasy trip, of course. So you know, he had this little model, in fact, of I can't remember what they're called now, but the little collectible pieces of ceramic houses, little vintage English houses and things like that, you know, quite sort of cutesy sort of things. He says, I want it just to be like this, and so, you know, blowing up from this size to sort of a great big sort of townscape that we ended up building in the stage was a bit of a challenge. But just as an aside, Peter said it was going to be The Hobbit when we went down there first. But he said it's a secret, we're actually doing Lord of the Rings. And you know, my first impression was, well, you know, well, here's one of the most well-read books in the world. And what's more, it's an English book, and you know what the English are like about their heritage. You know, they're very protective of it, and they don't sort of beat around the bush if they don't like something. You know, so there was immediately there's pressure to do the thing properly. The film, I must say, at the early stages was one sort of project, and it finished off as another sort of project. It finished off as a big kind of sweeping, expensive, you know, no money spared sort of project. But it started off very carefully. You know, we had a certain amount of money to spend. We had a certain amount of CGI shots we were able to do, so which was nowhere near enough to tell the story about scale and things like that, so we had to come up with clever ways to make the scale things work with forced perspective and all that sort of thing. But you know, it was just a matter of just, you know, looking at the jobs, prioritising, doing the budgets, making sure we have enough money to spend on this, that and the other, and just starting at the beginning, you know, so we just went about it that way. It used to take 3 hours to commute just from Christchurch Airport, so I have to fly, you know, we'd go and visit it kind of, you know, quite very regularly, from Wellington to Christchurch, get a car, drive for 3 hours to go out there. During the building process was actually over winter, so it was Arctic down there. There was a lot of things we had to do to be able to just build the set there in terms of conservation. You know, what we took out plant-wise had to go back. To be able to cross a couple of streams, which were spawning grounds for a native New Zealand fish, we had to build bridges across it without disturbing any of what was going on underneath. And then at the end of it, everything had to go, and we had to sort of never have been there really. That's what it had to look like. But there was also a lot of pressure not to even go there and build it there, but to build it on the back lot and surround it with blue screen or green screen and just put a virtual environment around it. But, you know, thankfully for Peter, he was very much into this sort of Fritz Coraldo thing about being there. There's something about being there that brought a lot of sort of chemistry to the place, I think, you know, and I think it really worked at the end, you know, to get these big sweeping helicopter shots and things, and the beautiful sort of structures that were on top of this fantastic location, you know, all together. It was pretty good. Nikki, who I'd known for quite a few years, you know, approached me about doing the design on it. I thought, yeah, right on. It's a small group of friends, you know, small. It's like the antithesis of Lord of the Rings. So, you know, I sort of got into that with a lot of sort of alacrity. Actually, it was, you know, going down to Gisborne and going down to Whangarā and sort of getting a feeling for the world that the film was going to be in. And then, you know, sorting out the design jobs, not a lot, but trying to, I don't know, find a character for the film that was going to sort of underlie the whole sort of story. The main house in the middle of Whangarā is I think they used to call it a Maori Affairs house. It's when the Department of Maori Affairs commissioned a certain amount of housemate building, you know. So it was a little cottage which, you know, wasn't big enough for us to film in, and besides which someone was living in it. So I ended up building the interior again on the stage here, and that was one of the nicest jobs actually, because you build a house, you know, when you go into someone's house, it's like a window into their soul in a way, you know, the way that they dress it and the decisions they make about what they place where and the colours they use and all that sort of stuff is very much to do with character. So, you know, the invented character of the person who was in the house, you know, I had to sort of come to terms with and make all those choices, and yeah, it was worked out really well. And that it did well internationally, I think was you know, it's like such a bonus. King Kong for me is a production designer's film, you know, and I think that, you know, having learnt so much from Lord of the Rings and being confident in what I do on a large scale was great to be able to just step straight into doing that project. And that it was a period piece with all the resonance of it having been a fantastic film to start off with, and Peter was very much quoting that original film, and B, the 1930s in New York was a classic time for New York, you know, itself. It was the most populous city in the world at the time, and it just had all this sort of style thing going to it. It had the Great Depression, you know, so it had this sort of sociological thing going on, and then it had a ship. So I had to design a ship, the Venture, and of course Skull Island itself, which with all this quirky kind of you know, just this small island with a lot of big dinosaurs and big things on it. Why is it like that? You know, I had to sort of invent in our own minds a sort of a backstory about why it's such a violent, competitive place with such vicious big dinosaurs on it. So, you know, coming up with all these ideas for that affected the design of the landscape a lot. This cracked, broken, sort of drowning landscape. You know, so all that collectively was a great challenge. And then, of course, Peter was adamant that Skull Island as a forest, as a piece of landscape, didn't exist in New Zealand. So we were going to have to build a thing on the stage. So the whole film, apart from one location, the Civic here in Auckland, Civic Theatre in Auckland, everything else was shot on the back lot and in the studio. So as a feature film, very big sets, very big environments to make from the ground up. It's fantastic. It didn't do great business, but it was a fantastic job for me to do a big Hollywood film in Hollywood and actually in New Orleans, as it turned out in terms of the location. So that was a great sort of advancement to my career in a way, as taking what I know and what I've learnt here in New Zealand and applying it overseas. You know, so I do find myself working overseas a little bit more these days, and you know, to have completed a big sort of tentpole production, they call it over there, you know, to have done that was fantastic. You know, I'd like to keep on doing some of them. I like to keep on doing that, and like to still keep on doing the small New Zealand films, because I think that they both sort of balance each other out very beautifully.